which will include your book, All Boys Aren't Blue. I have the hard copy, Audible, and I already pre-ordered your new book. So thank you for joining us tonight. Just a little bit about the NBA and the NBA YLD. The National Bar Association was founded in 1925 and is the nation's oldest and largest national network of predominantly African-American attorneys and judges. The YLD is the home of the young lawyer within the NBA and represents the interests of young Black attorneys under the age of 40 years old or originally admitted to practice within the past 10 years, whichever is more inclusive. This year's NBA YLD theme, 2020 and Beyond, recognizing the importance of the young lawyer, has been seen throughout 7 programmatic areas. 1, election protection, voter registration, and education. 2, COVID-19 recovery efforts. 3, efforts to eliminate police brutality. 4, 2020 census efforts and 2021 redistricting efforts. 5, professional and skills development. 6, mental health and wellness, and 7, pipeline programs and mentorship opportunities. This bar year, with the help of our very own social justice co-chair and tonight's moderator, Preston Mitchum, NBA YLD has attempted to create space where all of our members, but especially our LGBTQ members, feel included, accepted, remembered, and celebrated. Tonight's moderator, Preston Mitchum, is a Black and queer attorney, writer, and public speaker. Sorry, y'all. I live by the Pentagon. He brings nearly a decade of legal and policy experience to his role as the policy director of URGE, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. As policy director, Preston shapes state and federal strategies and policies that center the voices and leadership of young people in the South and Midwest. In addition to his work at URGE, Preston is also the co-chair of the Social Justice Committee for the National Bar Association Young Lawyers Division and an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center. Now to you, Preston.
Oh my God, this is an embarrassment of riches. And so I just want to first start by saying thank you so much to Madam Chair Williams and to Chair Patterson. We really appreciate you. We know the National Bar Association wouldn't be anything without your leadership. And so just want to start by showing some gratitude and saying thank you. As Chair Williams stated, I'm Preston Mitchum, and I have the great fortune of serving as co-chair of our Social Justice Committee. Thank you again to our co-sponsors, the NBA LGBTQ Division and the National LGBT Bar Association. I am thrilled to share space today with best-selling author, and as I'm going to slide in, my very best friend of All Boys Aren't Blue, George Matthew Johnson. If you have not done so, please purchase the book. We recommend doing so at bookshop.org. That's BOOKSHOP.org. We do have closed captioning made available. To access that, you can click closed caption, then click show subtitle. If that does not work for you, please feel free to direct message and we can make sure that we test it on the back end. As you all know, technology is what it is, and sometimes it malfunctions when you least expect it. But unfortunately, it happens when you need it the most. To that end, I also want to share that on your end, it may not necessarily show George and myself, and so you can personally pin us on your own screen if it's helpful for you to actually view it in that way. Also join us online by using the hashtags Black History Month, Queer History is Black, or Black History is Queer. And for tonight, please allow me to introduce George. George M. Johnson is a writer and activist based in New York who uses they, them pronouns. They have written on race, gender, sex, and culture for Essence, The Advocate, BuzzFeed News, Teen Vogue, and more than 40 national publications. George has appeared on BuzzFeed's AM to DM, as well as MSNBC. All Boys Aren't Blue is their debut novel and was an Amazon Best Book of the Year, an indie bestseller, a People's Magazine Best Book of the Year, an option for television by none other than Gabrielle Union. The New York Times called it an exuberant, unapologetic memoir, infused with a deep but clear love for its subject. At the time of publication, George used he, him pronouns. Speak with them on Twitter at IamGMJohnson and or visit their website at imgmjohnson.com. George, wow. So I just want to say first, talk about a full circle moment. I am beaming with pride for you, friend, and always will. For those who may not know, it's not like you just started writing with All Boys Aren't Blue.
Right.
You've been writing for a number of years. So tell us about your journey to writing and how did you even know you wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, so I guess it's weird because we know each other. But yes, so I started writing about 7 years ago in 2013, right after I had moved to Washington, D.C. I think I always wanted to write, but I was a finance major. So I went to school for two different things, spent a lot of money on a lot of degrees that I don't really use anymore, that I need to still pay back. But I first met Preston Memorial Day weekend of 2013, like 3 days after I had moved to Washington, D.C. Maybe about a week or two after that, Preston had an article come out in Ebony magazine. And I remember we were at a bar and we were reading it together. And I was so excited for Preston. And I was like, oh my God, like I've always wanted to write. And Preston was like, well, then write. And literally from there, I started writing. I was like, you know what? Like, what stopped me from writing? And from that moment, I started writing about things that I guess it was like if I was researching something and couldn't find it, then that meant that I needed to write it. And so I started writing very small, like topics around HIV, topics around financial aid, because that's where my background was. So I started writing in that way. And as I was living in the DC area, my activism was starting to grow. My interest, I guess my self-interest in being an activist for myself was growing. And I started writing more stories that started connecting with a lot of people, specifically Black LGBTQ people. And from there, I was able to kind of just start to gradually build my career, writing about many of the topics that we named before, which, you know, after about 5 years was when I finally decided that I was ready to write the book in 2018. And yeah, that was really the catalyst for it, was starting out in journalism, writing my story in bits and pieces, and finally coming to the decision where I knew that the full story needed to be told.
Yes, yes. So write, some annoying friend told you. And writing you did, of course. So, just thinking of All Boys Aren't Blue, was there a specific catalyst to tell this particular story? You just knew it was time? Like, how did you actually get inspired to write this particular book?
Yeah, honestly, this was right after Moonlight. It was around the time when Moonlight had come out. It was opening the door in many ways to not necessarily discuss queerness, but it was opening the door to discuss masculinity. That August, I had the opportunity to interview Terrell McCraney. I believe it was following like the Oscar win. And I was talking with him and just, basically he was just giving me advice on like, that the story needed to be continued, that Moonlight was just the start, and like that we needed to now use that as the catalyst to continue to put our stories out there and go, the next step. It was that November when Giovanni Melton was killed. And that really was what sparked, for those who don't know, Giovanni Melton was a young Black boy who was killed by his father. And the rumor or the quote that came out in most of the articles was that his father stated something to the effect of that he would rather have a dead son than a gay son. And that was in November of 2017. And I just remember how heavy that particular story just continued to like sit on me. And from there, it was like I knew that I had to put the story out there, because even though our visibility was starting to grow, even though our representation was starting to grow on a macro level, on a micro level, it just seemed like we were having all of these issues, the Ed Buck situation. There were just things that kept happening with Black queer people. And it was like, if we do not put this story out there, we're never going to get the change that we need to see. And so that was when I really decided, and there were two great memoirs that had come out. I don't want to forget that. Darnell Moore's No Ashes in the Fire and Michael Arsenault's I Can't Date Jesus came out. And Saeed Jones was also working on a memoir at the time. And so their books were so amazing, but I also felt that there was still more story to be told. And so that was really, all of that together was the catalyst for me to really put my version of the story out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that I really hear that too. And definitely I remember those three books when they came out, just sitting on the metro reading them and laughing and or crying on the metro and getting awkward looks from folks wondering what was happening with me in these books. So yeah, that turns me a little bit to your book itself, continuing down that path around, right? Like a big portion of your book obviously is dedicated to your family and especially your nanny. And so why was it important for you to really center your story around your family? And what was their reaction? Were you nervous about their reactions when they read the book?
Yeah, I thought it was important to center the story around my family because I think people went into it expecting trauma. I think that's how the Black narrative, people often only give us the chance to tell our story if the lens is fully seen through some traumatic lens where some savior came in. And I don't think that was the case in my story. I think what people came to the story and were surprised about was that my book was really a love letter, that I was fortunate enough to come from a family that even if we didn't fully understand what was going on, they never disrespected what was going on, and they always supported me until I was whole enough to really navigate the world in the way that I needed to navigate it. I think we rarely get to see that side of the story. I think we only see the one side where it tends to make Black communities look more homophobic. And in no way was I trying to say that our community isn't. Clearly, I talk about how homophobic and transphobic our community is. But I wanted to showcase that it's not an and or, it's like we exist simultaneously with a community that can be supportive and that is also unsupportive. And I think we had never got to see it told from our eyes in a way that didn't punish the people who raised us and who were our guardians. And I felt that even those who did harm me, that may have been my family, deserved to not be written about in a way that punished them. Like, I just do not believe in punishment anymore. I believe in restoration. I believe you can't punish someone or hold someone accountable who is already dead. So you can tell the story and you can tell it to maybe help someone else and to restore everyone in the situation who was harmed. And I think that's why I went into writing the book, making sure that my family knew how I felt about them. It was hard for some of them to read it because some of the things in the book they just didn't know. I think there was one person who I didn't want to read it. It was my dad. And I held on like as long as I could until my mom finally was like, look, your father really, really wants to read the book. And so I was like, all right. And I wrote a really nice message to him and he read it and he sent me a very beautiful text message just about how happy he was and how proud he was that I told the truth about everything. And that I always would have his support. And so I think, yeah, it was full circle moment for my whole family. And I think I'm just glad that our family gets to be a possibility model, much like, Dwayne and Gabrielle are a possibility model, like our family gets to be one too. And I think that's necessary. And so, yeah, I'm glad I wrote the book that way.
Yeah, I am too. What I really loved about your book, among many things, is it makes sure to not, even when it discusses moments of trauma, it's not done in a linear way. Right. We know trauma doesn't exist in us in a linear fashion. And you did such a holistic job of painting that story. And I want to talk about one particular part, if you would like to do so, which is really around your smile. You spent a really big portion discussing your smile and why that's so important now, but it took you a while to get to that point. Could you talk a little bit about that and why that's the importance for so many people?
Yeah, the first chapter I talk about, in that first chapter, the book starts off with what my first trauma was. And at 5 years old, we got jumped while walking home from school and I got kicked in the mouth. I believe it did 2 times or 3 times, but the boy kicked my teeth out and I was only 5. And I held on to that for a very, very long time. Anyone who knows me knows I take a lot of pictures where my mouth is closed. It was something that always bothered me for many, many, many years. And I think as the older I got, the more, I guess, spiritual, the more reflective I started to become. I started to want to do that work to figure out like, well, why don't you do this? Or why do you act this way? Or why are you so hard a lot of times, right? Like why is your demeanor at times just very hard? And I was able to trace at least, the smiling thing back to that moment, because that really was the traumatic moment that I never took time to work on. Like once I even had the resources and the funds and the insurance and those things, I still did not go to fix the problem that I had with my teeth. And suffice to say, when your teeth get kicked out that early, they then grow in, your adult teeth grow in really fast. So you're like 5 or 6 years old with these huge teeth in your mouth and then crowding and all kind of other stuff happens. And so it really, I love that story is in there because now I'm 35 and I'm on my last Invisalign tray. So they're in right now. And so it's like now I do have straight teeth, right? And I have a dental implant surgery coming up, and it's costing a whole lot of money to fix all of that stuff. But I think I needed to write the book to get to this place. It was the first thing I decided to do right after Nanny passed away. Like she passed away in December, and the first thing I decided to do in that January, I said I was going to start working on healing my old traumas, because she had healed one herself around my identity right before she died, which is why I now go by they, them, because of the conversation I had with her before she passed. So once I got comfortable with identity, the next thing was getting comfortable with the other things. And I went to the dentist January of last year, and I was like, I don't care how much it costs, I just gotta fix it. And now I'm at the end of fixing that. But I think it's great that I'm alive to be able to tell the story, because I think people can then read the story, see who I am today, and it helps them to then kind of go back and process, like, well, damn, am I doing this thing at 30 years old because of something that happened to me at 8 years old that I just never addressed? And I think more people need to really go back in time and think, what was the moment that the thing that happened changed me? And how is that thing manifesting itself today? And how do I do the work to start to correct that thing?
Yes, I love that. I specifically remember the moment when you texted me, was like, it's time, I'm going to the dentist. And I'm like, well, you can pay for my appointment too. But but in the meantime, no, I really remember that moment, and it's something that just sticks with me. So thank you for sharing that with the audience as well. So pivoting a little bit, right? It's February 23rd. It's still Black History Month. Obviously, Black history is year round. But we do have this carve out designated in the United States. And so with that carve out, I do want to share something in your dramatic live reading that came up that you said in the very beginning. And your quote was, "Blackness is inherently queer." And, I paused when I heard it because it's the thing that I knew was going to ruffle some feathers among some of our cis hetero counterparts. What does that mean for you? When you say Blackness is inherently queer, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I always look at that, and I say that statement all the time, and it always gets people riled up. But I always say it because I look at it from a micro level and I look at it from a macro level. From a micro level, I say Blackness is inherently queer because queer people exist, right? Queer Black people exist. So as long as, if we are saying, well, this is what Blackness is, and we pull 10,000 Black people and say, well, this is what Blackness is, then every intersecting identity means that it is inherently Black. So that means woman is inherently Black, and trans is inherently Black, and queer is inherently Black. And once we start, if we want to look at a class level and an education level, it means that poorness is inherently Black, and disability is inherently, like, these things are all inherent to our Blackness. And so they all have to be, that, which again is why I hate the term diversity and inclusion, or I hate the term inclusion, because I don't need to be included in anything I already exist within. And so that's why I don't talk about, well, Black hetero people got to include, well, you can't include me in something I already own, right? I own Blackness just like you own Blackness. And so if it is inherently heterosexual, it is also inherently queer. That's how I see it on a micro level. On a macro level, I say it is inherently queer because to be Black in this world is to be on the outside of humanity. And so if you just look at Blackness, and just what the definition of queerness is, which is different or weird, that is how white people view us. White people, since the beginning of time, have not seen us as human. That is why it was so easy for them to dub us, as property. That is why it was so easy to continue to deny us the things that we want. That is why that is why you have white people say, I don't see color, because if they don't see color, they don't see you, right? And that truly means that on a macro level, they really do see color, right? Because you have to be able to see it, because you know how to deny that person those things based on it. And so I always say on a macro level, Black folks are queer because we sit outside of what humanity is for every other person. Every other person gets a chance at what humanity looks like. We do not. Wherever we go on this planet, every country, and I say this, we may not know what the slurs are in every other country, but every single person in this world knows what the N-word is. And every single person knows what the N-word means to us. And that is why I say we cannot even travel anywhere in this world, because everybody knows what our slur is, right? Like the one slur, like how does a whole world know how to disrespect you unless you are opposite what the world thinks is normal? And that is why I say Black folk on a macro level, we are just queer. And so we have to start to accept that, we have never been seen as an accepted race. We have never been seen as human. And I think once you accept that on a macro level, you can then understand on a micro level what identity has to mean and how identity plays a role in the landscape of Blackness. And I hope I explained that.
Yeah.
That was as best as I could get.
No.
Sorry.
No, I received fully. As you were speaking and talking about the micro level, something I was thinking about, right? The unspoken word was intersectionality, right? And not the passive word that many white feminists learned 5 years ago, not a word just for political and policy buzz points, right? Like actively, like true to Kimberly Crenshaw's words in the late 1980s, which was not about counting identities, right? But it was about really underscoring how multiple systems impact people based on those identities. And so, yes, when you are Black and you are queer, the system impacts you differently. When you're Black and trans, the system impacts you differently. If you're Black and disabled, if you're Black and poor, among other things, right? So that's what I hear when you're talking about the micro level. At the same time, it's also true at the macro level. And so I appreciate that clarification. But that also brings me to a point that you made earlier, but I want to do a deeper dive on, which is around the concept of blue. So there are many people, who they know we're best friends. They're like, blue, that means one thing, right? I'm like, well, no, you should first order the book at bookshop.org. And then when you do that, then come talk to us around the multiple meanings of blue. So can you talk to us when you say all boys aren't blue, and just thinking of the concept of blue, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I think is the part that jumps off the page for everybody. Well, I ain't gonna say for everybody, because there are a lot of people who read the title and still didn't get it. And I was like, and you have to say it like all boys aren't blue. And then they're usually like, oh, it's like, okay, I get it. And so like the first thing is the notion of gender reveals. Gender reveals, in addition to the fact that people are having gender reveals and people are dying at gender reveals because of explosives and like weird things happening at gender reveals, I feel like a direct pushback against the fact that queer people now have more visibility and representation is that heterosexual community has decided that they are going to name the gender of their child even earlier than a baby shower. And so they have now created a new event to specifically assign the gender to a person that they have not met. And that is where that first part of All Boys Aren't Blue comes from, because I always say, if my parents had a gender reveal and blue smoke came out, well, they would have been in store for something totally different by the time I became an adult. I had a transgender cousin named Hope. When Hope was born, Hope had a gender reveal and blue smoke came out, like the world would have been in store for something that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, right? And so when I say all boys aren't blue, it is literally saying like when we gender children at that young of an age, and that includes the doctor too, who makes the quote unquote final decision. It sends children down pathways that are not okay, because the child has not told you who they are. And I say that because think about it, especially just as a woman, because a doctor says you're a girl, that means you will make less money for the rest of your life than a man, simply because a doctor said this. And so once you start to break it down like that to a lot of people, they then do take a step back like, oh, now I see why gender should be abolished. It's like, right? Like at the end of the day, when a person says you are a boy or you are a girl, it literally then dictates how systems of oppression will affect you from the beginning. And that's outside of just race. And so that's the first notion of like, we have to just remove this whole gendering of colors equaling femininity and masculinity and all of that. Blue also, of course, pays homage to Moonlight, which originally was a play that was called Black Boys Look Blue in Moonlight. Blue also makes reference to policing because my dad was a cop, and I do talk about what that experience is like when you grow up in a household with policing, while also knowing what policing does to Black community. And I guess it's not really hard, but just kind of like living at that duality of the Black officer who works within that system of a state that harms Black people. And then the final blue was to make reference to the character of Blue from Queen Sugar, which I thought was really, and it's funny because that character doesn't get talked about enough in my opinion, but just how early on, like this whole character of this little boy playing with a doll and how season after season, it started to play out. And you saw like how it was primarily the women in the family who got concerned first about Blue's identity. And so just like that whole character, I think we need to see more of that in television. And I just love the way that they had played out that character on TV. And so, yeah, that's what it makes reference to.
Yes, and they'll learn more of that at bookshop.org. It's funny I keep saying that because I'm not being paid by them, but I do honor smaller book companies, and it's really important for us to honor, beyond the big ones. Buy them anywhere, of course, but definitely represent the smaller book companies.
Or indie.
Yes, 100%. The one thing I want to say to folks listening in on this conversation is one, thank you. Please continue to put your questions in the chat. Please continue to use the hashtag Black History Month, Queer History is Black, Black History is Queer. And I also want to say that if you are queer, non-binary, or trans listening in, you probably had terrible sex ed, if you had it at all. And frankly, that's the result of terrible education inequities. But in continuing on that line of thought, one thing about All Boys Aren't Blue that I recognize is it really is a love letter to all the things that are possible within sexuality education and within the spectrum of queerness and sexuality. So I don't know if it was the intent to actually create that love letter, but could you talk about why that was so important for you to actually talk about like sex and sex older in life?
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember when I first wrote the chapter about sex, like when I first wrote the chapter about, okay, I'm going to talk about the first time I had consensual sex as I don't know if everybody knows the terms, but a top or a bottom. So we're just gonna throw it out there. And you can use your imagination and you can pretty much figure out what those terms mean.
Teach the people, George, teach the people.
Right, it's like you're either giving or you're receiving. So top is the person giving, bottom is the person receiving. And I wrote about my experience as both, like both experiencing both of those things. My book is a young adult book. And so a lot of people took pause because I tell the truth. Like I don't hold anything back. And I think for me, I remember when I first wrote it, I wrote it very like clinical. And my editor's note back to me was like, you can spice this up. And I was like, oh, okay. And so then when I rewrote it, it was like, oh, okay, well, this is a lot more than I thought you were going to write. But the one thing that I realized was, as it doesn't make me cringe. It makes you a little embarrassed because everybody knows my business, right? But at the end of the day, the book is for kids and for young adults who really, really do need to know the ins and outs of sexual education, sexual health. And I even make mention like heterosexual kids aren't even taught proper sex education or health. So this book is not just to get us some type of sexual health, it's to get all young adults sexual health. But the thing I realized was anything that I keep out the book, it only hurts them. And yeah, it's a little embarrassing at times. And yeah, it's a little cringy when I reread some of those parts. I'm like, I really told everybody my business. But I know that the end goal is I can deal with feeling a little bit out there, a little bit too vulnerable, a little bit too transparent if I know that it's helping someone who's 14 or 15 or 16 who really has nothing else but this as a guide. And so that was really, and like you said, the love letter, because I talk about non-consensual sex, which was the sexual abuse with my cousin, versus the consensual sex I had versus being sexually assaulted in the bathroom. Like I talk about both sides of it, but I try and talk about it from a way that kind of makes it a full circle moment. So, only because not doing so, like I said, only continues to harm our youth, specifically Black youth, because we are already given less tools simply because they are Black youth. Once you put the intersecting identities in there, they are given even less tools. And so, I had to make a very, very tough decision to fully go all the way there with my business. But I think people appreciate it.
Yeah, I did. And I also agree that transparency, though tough, saves lives. So really appreciate you doing that. I really want, I have a couple more questions before we turn into audience Q&A. And one of the questions is really around an article that really stuck to my heart that you recently wrote for Mike.com. And I want to read a specific quote in there, but for folks who are viewing in, the title of it is, "As a queer Black person, I demand a do-over for my adolescence." The title alone hit me. And the quote is, "When your Blackness intersects with queerness, not only are you walking around in the body of a mini menace, you are further stifled in adapting to relentless hetero norms. This combination can force young Black queer people such as myself to endure a different type of adolescence, one that can last well into adulthood." Wow. Maybe reflect on so many personal moments of what that actually means for Black queer people when we don't know about all the range, right, until we become that very adult. Mm-hmm. And so can you talk more about what that means to you and why that's harmful for Black queer people?
Yeah, and it's funny because the title says what the title says, because do I demand a do-over? Absolutely. But do I demand the do-over for myself? Not necessarily, because All Boys Aren't Blue is a byproduct of the adolescence that I had. So I would much rather be on this side of it, writing about these things and saying, because the do-over is really, I want these kids to have a chance. Do I deserve one? No, but I really want these youth to have a chance. And the only way they can do that is if we name it. And so, it's funny because I think we just quickly assume that the main things that are kept from Black queer kids are sex education at like the top of the list. But I don't think we fully process that if a person cannot identify as who they are, then they are just living life as someone they are not. And if I knew since I was 5 that I was different, by the time I was in high school, I knew that I was gay, but I could not live that life. So 8th grade prom, there's a picture of me with a girl named Jay Williams. 12th grade prom, there's a picture of me with a girl named Shanika. College, there are no pictures of me with anyone because I wasn't dating, I wasn't doing anything, right? And so, but again, you all, or heterosexual people, got to go to prom and they got to start to learn social skills as adolescents, like dating, like dating, sexual education, how to integrate into adulthood, right? Like, because again, I think we don't realize once I go into the workforce, I'm still in the workforce as someone who I'm not. But you are in the workforce after college as someone who you are. And so I think when we see like the whole, what is it? It's basically like you go to high school, then you go to college. Then by the time you're 25, you get it out your system. By the time, you see heterosexual people around 27, between 27 and 32, most of them getting married, having children, all those things. And you're literally seeing queer people and LGBT people just learning how to date, just trying to figure out how to even say publicly who they are. And so that delay, which I think can be 10 to 15 years of a delay in a certain social skill that heterosexual kids start to get ingrained in them by the age, little girls get easy bake ovens, little boys get cars and trucks and guns and all of those things. Well, what do little queer kids get? We get things that don't match who we are. So we're just pretending until we can get to an age where we can do things that match who we feel and how we feel. And we can live our life as we are. But that's sometimes 10 to 15 years after a heterosexual child has already learned that skill set. And so, yeah, I wrote that article because that delay is what continues to harm us as Black LGBTQ people, but it harms the overall community because you have just two subsets of people who are literally operating under different skill sets, different social skill sets. And I don't think we put enough importance on how Black kids integrate into society and that skill set and skill building that has to happen in the adolescence years. The denial of that, and how many kids are being denied that. Black kids are already denied it, school to prison pipeline. There are already other factors that deny Black kids childhood. So if we are now saying that this particular group of Black kids is not only denied childhood by society, but denied a childhood by their own community in many ways, where does it leave you? It leaves you with, like I said, like an adult class of people who are still trying to figure out childhood things.
Yeah, that's so true. It also makes me think about when I was younger and I got these Hot Wheels, and I'm like, I actually want to make this gooey, nasty brownie in my sister's easy bake oven. But I'm like, give me all the uncooked food. I don't want this Hot Wheel. So that's one thing I distinctly remember about growing up too, and how hard it was. And the notions of sexualizing children, people think that happens just because someone is gay. Meanwhile, we'll ask 4-year-old little boys how many girlfriends does he have, and call little Black girls fast-tailed, right, just for existing. And so you're absolutely right, and it does make me think of like not only the sexualization of queer and trans people at young ages and what that means when we don't learn coping skills, mental health, and social-emotional skills until much later in life, and how that actually impacts our existence. So it is 7:13 Eastern time. We have a couple more minutes left before audience Q&A. I want to ask one more question. And that question is a lighter question around who are some of your favorite Black queer writers? Either those who are famous and the world knows, or ones who are up and coming.
Yeah, I love anything that Robert Jones writes. Robert Jones has a new book out called Prophets. Robert is just amazingly talented. I love anything that Raquel Willis writes. I love anything that Travell Anderson writes. I like a lot of things that Michael Street writes from time to time. I love Preston's writing, of course. No, I've always loved Preston's writing. I love Hari Ziad, who also has a book out called Black Boy Out of Time. I think I got that right. Of course, I love, Michael Arsenault has been a favorite of mine for many years, very witty in their writing. I think it's Deshaun Harrison is a great writer. I think there are a lot of really, really talented younger writers, specifically. I wish I knew as much as a lot of the younger queer writers know. They just write so well, and they just have so much process that I just did not have in my 20s. Like in my 20s, I was still the stepmaster at my college chapter. Like I was like still doing like dumb frat stuff. Like I was not processing the world in the ways in which they are processing the world in their 20s. And I think it's amazing.
Yeah, no, listen, young Black queer people, ooh, wow, like they inspire me, but just not only how brilliant they are, but how much they know themselves. Like how much many of them are so sure of themselves. And I can't claim that at all. Can't claim that at all. Right. But that teaches us that there's some shift, or at least some demand to create that shift at least. So turning it to audience Q&A, and I definitely have a few more if there aren't more, but I see one that from Layla. Thank you, Layla, for submitting your question. Please don't apologize for your question. We'll work through this question either way. So the question is, if boys are supposed to like blue and boys are blue, quote unquote, why don't more people support gay men?
Oh, because people feel, okay, I got it. Because people feel that being gay is the effeminization of manhood. And so you're denied manhood simply because you are gay. And I mean, you could be the most masculine gay person and you will still be denied manhood because it is just seen as an effeminate trait to love a man, because the only thing that heterosexual community sees as acceptable loving a man is a woman. And because homophobia and transphobia is a byproduct of misogyny, even if you are a man, even if you are a masculine man who loves another masculine man, it's still seen as an effeminate or a feminine behavior or trait.
Yeah, completely agree. Also want to, and Kenneth, I hope this is okay because I'm scrolling up and I do see your statement, not a question, but I think it's something that is true for many Black queer boys, especially. You said, I can relate to you, George, about how close you were with your grandma. My grandma was my biggest champion as well. She passed in April of 2018, and I miss her daily. And I admire how she inspired you to embrace your authentic self, and that she loved, thank you, and that she loved you unconditionally. And my grandma was a minister, so I was apprehensive about telling her about me, and she just embraced me, and it only drew us closer. And that makes me think about some of the stories that we have. And, I want to say this as gently as I can, but what I sometimes consider deathbed confessionals that many Black queer boys have with our grandmothers, especially. And there's a closeness that so many of us have had with our as Black queer boys and Black queer children, with our grandmothers especially. It makes me think about when Alex Trebek died, how many people I saw actually sharing stories of them watching Jeopardy with their grandmothers.
Yeah.
And do you have any, does that resonate with you? How's that sound for you?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I have another book coming out in September that talks specifically about the relationship that I had and my cousins, because it was myself, my younger brother Garrett, and my two cousins, Roland Rasul, who were primarily raised by her. Even if our parents were around, she was the primary. And I tell every single story about our relationship with her and how she, was this guiding force of that we could all go to. Like if it was anything, like she just was the most open person about it. And I think she was she was the buffer between us and our parents. If like we disagree with our parents, she was the one who played referee in many ways. Or she was the one who made the final decision over our parents. If she felt that it was something for us specifically. It totally resonates. I just think that, matriarchs, they just have a different way of viewing the world from a different lens than a lot of other people. I think parents oftentimes feel like you're a reflection of them. And I think their parents don't necessarily operate thinking that their grandchildren are a reflection of them. I think they're more concerned about creating the best people to go out into the world. And so I think just because of that lens, they're able to do something much different with us, specifically Black queer kids.
Indeed. Thank you. And I want to recognize, I see Wesley's hand being raised. Did you actually want to speak your question? And thank you so much for joining. You do so much wonderful work, so I appreciate that. But did you want to ask your question?
A question, yeah, and thanks, Preston, for being here, and George as well. And so, on behalf of the National LGBT Bar, we're super happy to have you and partner with YLD and the NBA and the NBA LGBTQ Division for this. And I saw one of your events with the center, I guess back in June of last year, and read the book then. And I love the heart and warmth that like pulses through it. I mean, it's such a great arc of a story. I have less about the story itself, but there's so much more to writing a book and publishing a book really than just the writing of it. And I see it over your shoulder as well. So I wondered if you had any story about how the illustration of you on the cover came about, and how you chose it and how you worked through all that.
Yeah. The cover is an interesting story because most authors don't have as much control over the book cover, and I was extremely adamant about what the cover looked like. I mean, like extremely adamant very early on, emailing my editors, my publicist, like whoever was in charge of it. I was like, I have to have a very, very big say in what this looks like, because I knew that what we were creating was so different, especially for young adults. And so, yeah, like the cover, like we literally, that's me, it's my face. And we shot pictures of like my side profile in the Macmillan office. And we sent it to Charlie Palmer, who is the amazing artist that ended up doing the rendering for it. The flower crown was my idea. I wanted it to, there's like kind of like a trope, like, oh, like, well, putting flowers on your head doesn't make you gay or queer. I'm like, right, it definitely doesn't. However, the imagery of a man, of what we know as man, with this softness of flowers, it does kind of combine the two things, right? And so, and you can see the color on the cover, it goes from blue to pink at the bottom. And then the flowers, there is a bird of paradise flower in the front, which is my mom's favorite flower. There is a poinsettia in the middle, which was Nanny's favorite flower that she used to keep around, especially during Christmas. And then the yellow rose is my fraternity's flower. And people think that part is always interesting because they're like, wait, a fraternity has a flower? And it's like, yes, all the fraternities have flowers. And so it's always very interesting once you start to tell that part, because then it literally is acknowledging the masculinity, and that's the acknowledgement to how important of a role that plays in my life. And so yeah, I think once I started dissecting the cover and people started to see the cover, and then was like, oh wow, like it does speak to every side of you. So yeah, but I chose it specifically because I wanted young adults who needed the book to feel affirmed from the very beginning. And I wanted, like, if you saw the book and you read the title and it makes you cringe, then that's the people who need to read it. And I wanted people to have to not be afraid to hold a book like that on the train or in public. Because if you have a book like that with that particular cover, people are going to wonder what the hell you're reading. And so, yeah, that was all went into my decision process. I'm sure a lot of people have not picked up the book because of that, but that's fine too.
I love it. I didn't know the story behind the flowers, and that's great. And then the side eye as well.
Yes.
Now that part was.
I was going to say that is because that has been caught on camera with my friends. I turn my head very quick, and my grandmother Nanny used to do it, and literally I did it one time, and Preston caught it when we were at a brunch, and it was on camera, and my cousin started texting me like, "Oh my God, you look like Nanny when you do that." And I have a picture of Nanny with her face just like that side eye in my phone. And so, yeah.
So I do want to get to two more questions. So I hope it's okay if we keep you maybe 5 minutes past, because I think both of them are really important. I want to end with Gabriella's question, but I want to ask Otis's question. Because speaking of side eyes, and I know this exact moment, George, I loved your book and thank you for it. That said, I was first introduced to your brilliance during a video in which there were various Black Republicans, Democrats, Independents giving their perspective. You dropped so many bombs. It was awesome. I'm curious about what is your perspective of the current political state of Black America? Specifically, do you believe this time of racial reckoning can and will be different?
Okay, so first you're talking about that damn Vice video, which I think we shot that had to be either 2 or 3 years ago, but people to this day still are using it on TikTok. Like it went viral on TikTok like maybe 3 months ago. It went viral again on TikTok, just my segment. Like they have like, people have done so many things with just the parts that I said. And I think that video is probably gonna stick with me for the rest of my life when I get like famous, I guess, people are gonna go back to like this video of me fighting these Republicans for 2.5 hours that was condensed down to like 30 minutes. The current state of like Black America I mean, I think as someone who I am extremely spiritual and I think every iteration of the world has had a major period of change and transition. Usually every major change and transition comes with a lot of death. So if you look just at the history of the world, when we went into, anytime we moved into a different period, whether it was post-slavery, you can look at how many deaths had to happen once we moved into a world that was post-slavery, right? Whether it's the Civil War, right? Like hundreds of thousands of people died in the Civil War, right? You don't even realize how many people were killed, but every iteration of the world has went through this. So we're in COVID, we are watching the same thing happen. So we are now moving into a world post-COVID because it's never gonna look like the world we had before. You might as well, it's done, that's it. That world that was here before, it's gone. Post-COVID, things are gonna look different. There will be some people who will never not travel with a mask again. It's just not going to go back to the thing that it used to be. And so I look at government that way. I look at all of it that way. The reckoning around Black lives. I think it all is tied together, right? What is the next iteration of the world look like? Do we have a chance to make some movement with Blackness and Black folks and politics and all those things? I think we have a chance to. Because I think we are seeing what the reckoning of whiteness looks like, right? I think it's very interesting, you know, because we could drag the Democrats all day and, you know, it is what it is. Like, we have a binary system. Binary systems just seem to not work for us, right? But I think it is interesting because we are at an interesting space of, like, we can say the Republican Party, right? A party that needs to expand its base, but the only expansion left is if you put people of color in power. And isn't that an interesting place that you have now found yourself, where the only expansion you can do, because you can't bring in any more white people, is if you start to bring in Black people or other, you know, non-Black people of color. And so we are at a very interesting reckoning because you potentially could see within the next 10 years the same amount of Black politicians on both sides, right? Then what does that look like intra-community? What does our politics look like as Black folk, as we are seeing Black men shift to being more Republican? Black people have always been conservative. So that actually is not the issue, right? The issue is something totally different. And so I think now, though, is the time where the reckoning is happening, and it's just happening live and in our face. And so now some decisions will have to be made, right? Like, I think the ways of old, the complacency, the way that, oh, okay, Democrats are in, we safe. And then 2 years later, a swing happens. And then 4 years later, a swing happens. I don't know if we're gonna see that anymore. I honestly think I think this was the moment. And I think the pendulum of politics stopped. I think we're here. And I think now you just have so many people who are fed up with it. A reckoning is happening in real time. We just have to kind of go through it to see what we look like on the other side of it.
Absolutely. Because we've never really gotten to the symptoms. We see the results, but have never looked at the symptoms. So yeah. For sure. I should say this, and I have to say this, not because Madam Chair is looking at me, but the National Bar Association is a nonpartisan organization. Just important for us to mention. Also, the last question, but certainly not least, is from Gabriella, and it's a question about advice. Gabriella teaches middle school students. What is the biggest piece of advice you would give to LGBTQIA+ kids? For folks who may not know, I is intersex, A is asexual. A never is ally. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Thank you. But I want to turn it to you for that, George.
The question is, what's the question?
Biggest piece of advice for middle school students, but for young students who are LGBTQIA.
Yeah, biggest piece of advice is twofold, right? I hate the notion of coming out. It's not safe. And I think anyone who says like, oh, you should come out, or y'all should come out, or y'all should, if you're not also working on creating safety for that, especially for a child, then that's not it. That cannot be where we start. I am big on agency. And so what I teach kids who often ask me, how do I come out? I always tell them like, well, you're not really coming out. So let's like dead the language, right? Because that language is basically saying I sit outside of community. And I've already told y'all, if you in it, you in it. If you Black and you queer, you're already Black. So you in Black community, right? Or same with LGBTQ just overall. So I always tell them, look at it as if you're inviting people in. right? So take back power in the language. You are not coming out. You are actually inviting people in. People have assumed that you are this thing. And what you are doing is inviting them into your space to tell them, I am not this thing. And I think if you look at it from that lens, it gives kids the agency to control the conversation in many ways. And I always tell kids when you're having this conversation, one, let them know that you are inviting them in. And two, have a list of reasons of how you can be supported and control and guide the conversation from there. Because a lot of times parents will want to start to question or so before you can get there, this is what it is. And this is how I want to be supported in this. And I think leading it like that, it changes the tone of what's actually happening. It is not, oh my God, my child is this. Oh, you get less of that when the child is controlling, like, listen, this is what it is. This is how I feel. I'm inviting you in to know because I don't want to fake this in front of you. And I don't want our relationship to look like this. And so that's what I always teach kids is let them know you are in the power position because you're telling them the truth about who you are. And then the second thing I always say is, if it's not safe to invite people in, hide it. We're not even gonna keep it. We're not gonna fake it. We're not, I'm not gonna fake and lie like, oh no, find a way. No, stay safe. I am big on safety. Like the kids need to stay safe. Nigel Shelby had love at home and did not have love in society. I have no desire to push kids into unsafe spaces for the appeasement of heterosexual people. The third thing then you tell them is to find their village. That village can be the aunt. I always say everybody got the aunt or the uncle that know and is always the one that's like, well, I don't know why your parents tripping, but you can come to me. If you have the person that you can go to, or your student, but has the person they can go to, let them tell them like to build their village with the people they can go to. I had someone buy the book. I had a message sent where there was a young kid, 15, who sent me a message basically saying, my parents wouldn't allow me to read this book in their house. So my best friend's mom ordered the book and I read it when I go over there. You sometimes have to figure out how I can work the system. Because one, it let me know the book is still going to get to them. But two, it was the thing like, that's the message I need to put out in the world. Find your village, because there could possibly be a village out there that can still get you everything that you need and support you so you can be yourself, even if it's just for small periods of time. And you can always be yourself in your imagination. I know that sounds simple, but I do it all the time. There are times where I want to be a little bit more feminine. And if I can't do it in public, I do it in my mind.
George. So if you are able to, please unmute, give a virtual round of applause, just show so much love and adoration to George, please. Thank you. And also people are just saying thank you and they really love the tips. I especially love your note around safety. Right? It's not coming out, it's inviting people in, and you invite people in when society has created a space for you to feel safe and comfortable to do so. So thank you so much for that. I do want to wrap up, and I please stay on while I wrap up. The two things I want to mention, NBA YLD has a ton of events this week. So I also want to say tomorrow, we have an event for the YLD specifically at 6 p.m. Eastern time, the Pathways to Bar Leadership Roadshow with National Bar Association Vice President, Lamont Bailey. On Thursday, we have two events. You can join the State Bar of Georgia's Attorney Wellness Committee at 12 p.m. Eastern on Zoom, Setting the Bar to Vision Board Party for Lawyers. And if you're not a lawyer, something that you still may be interested in is at 6 p.m. on Thursday. You can join the NBA YLD Power Hour with Patricia Brown Holmes, who was the special prosecutor in the killing of Laquan McDonald and the attorney for Jussie Smollett. So thank you. I know Madam Chair put some other things in the chat. I know we have past National President Ben Crump speaking. There's a book meet and greet. Please register. Drop in your information, drop in and just say hello. Once again, I just want to thank you all so much for joining us virtually. We'll be out of this pandemic sometime soon, hopefully. But thank you for taking the time to be with the National Bar Association Young Lawyers Division, the LGBTQ Division, and the National Bar Association, the National LGBT Bar Association. We deeply appreciate your collaboration and support. And please, 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 the last thing I'll say, remember that Black people are queer too. Happy Black History Month.